Welcome everybody back to Sustainable River Basin Management Module 3.1 Part 4. Today I'm going to talk to you about poverty and gender. Now let's start with the definition of the term gender, and you may be asking yourself, what are we going to talk about this while we are listening or learning about a course on sustainability in river basin management. Now the misconception on the term gender is that when we talk about this, we are not talking about simply or referring simply to women or men. We are also not emphasizing the biological differences between people in general. What we mean by the term gender is how each of those different roles, rights and responsibilities of men and women and the relationships between them are defined. We also refer to gender when we mean the way their qualities, behaviors and identities are determined. And this process is called socialization. It's our environment that shapes how our qualities are and our behaviors are valued. And this is influenced by the historical, also the religious, the economic and cultural realities in which we are embedded as individuals. Now, we should keep in mind that those definitions of what is typical, what our roles are in a society, change over time. So one of the examples of these changing gender roles I want to show you here in the context of water. And this comes from a publication on water problems, No Gender, recently published. And what it states is, in the past, women were only responsible for fetching water and taking care of households. This is what the usual notion is, that this is the role of women. And it keeps on saying that it was a taboo for them to be seen getting involved in issues to do with borehole repairs and maintenance, as it was considered a man's job. So there were clear roles in the society of what a woman is supposed to contribute in terms of water and what a man is supposed to be doing in the context of water provision. Now, things have changed, and that's explained in the following way. Now that migration from rural to urban areas has increased in Zimbabwe, and particularly in Gwanda, the village this story is talking about, where men seek greener pastures in neighboring South Africa, women have been left to fend for themselves. So there's a change taking place, or is being forced to happen due to a particular situation, which is in this case the migration from rural to urban areas of mostly the men of that village for various reasons. So this is one of the examples of how changes can be imposed or be triggered and naturally take place, and show that repair jobs or maintenance of bore wells and pumps are not biologically linked to the role or the possibilities of what a woman or a man is able to do and contribute to the society. Now, let's look into the gender and water, how those two are linked to each other beyond the water, the example that I just brought up. We can generally say that human bonds with water reflect the cultural values and social differences embedded in societies. By studying water, how water is reflected, we also can understand societies better. And in that we have to take note that there are significant differences observed between men and women in terms of, first of all, access to water, the way water has been used, and the way water has been managed. And just by those differences of how women or men deal with water in different ways, that has become an issue that has been converted into what we call the gender discrimination, which out of this places restrictions on the autonomy of men or women, resulting in inequalities. And those have been structured legally or culturally in various ways, in also the way we express ourselves, the language that we use, what a woman should be doing or a man should be taking care of certain things, what we expect somebody to do. Now, let's move on into the issue of the gender discrimination a little bit closer. What we derive from this is that the inequalities very often favor men in opposition to women. And this can be found in, for example, uneven distribution of income, the control over poverty, who controls this, and the control over income. The access to productive inputs, such as credits or even the possibility to open individual bank accounts, may be restricted to a married woman rather than an unmarried woman, a single woman, for instance. The access to decision-making resources are often in favor of men. The access to water resources, the rights, the entitlement, and very often we see a bias or a social exclusion from labor markets. Now, the result of those favors which add up become self-perpetuating of unfair impacts in general. And all this takes on a negative self-reinforcing loop which reduces benefits, it reduces the development options, it marginalizes women especially, and it reduces the possibility of these women to contribute to the society in general. So this is what is a result of this very small entry or difference in, for instance, how water is being used and managed, which takes up such large, far-reaching consequences. Let's look into the gender roles in water, and this is a statistics and a summary of various sources which I suggest you to pick up and to obtain additional information and more data on that. This is an example which shows us the percentage here of households, and here a separation into rural households and urban households per region. And this is Sub-Saharan Africa, this is Asia, Latin America, and Eastern Europe here. So what we can see is this orange block here and the dark orange are both women below and above 15 years, and the gray, light gray and dark gray are showing the percentage of households where men and boys are responsible for collecting water usually. So now we see some interesting differences between those regions. For instance, in Eastern Europe and Latin America, the responsibilities are closely, almost equally distributed between men and women or girls and boys. It means that the factor of being woman or being men does not play the major role on who actually collects the water. Then probably come additional points, and it also means that boys or girls are not preferentially leaving school because, or missing education, missing school because of their obligation to collect water. Now, when we look into the situation in Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, we see that unequally women are involved or made responsible for the collection of water. In Asia, we see that compared to the sub-Saharan Africa, almost equally boys and girls are made responsible in rural areas and urban areas as well, whereas the women later on are much more or usually responsible for the water rather than men at a later stage. This is much more predominant in sub-Saharan Africa, where mostly women and mostly girls are collecting water, spending most of their time with that. So we can summarize that this is a women's work, collecting water in at least sub-Saharan Africa and rural Asia. And we can also state from that, looking into population numbers, that both women and girls spend substantial billions of hours annually in procuring water. And this now takes us to a gendered division of labor. So we are in a discrimination pathway and a gendered division of labor moreover. Now, there are various ways of interpreting this towards a positive and towards a negative impact, that gender-based labor division. It takes us to the fact that there is water knowledge being developed. Traditionally or in conventional science and engineering, we clearly separate our technology development from the end user, from the technology user. And this becomes more predominant when the technology has been developed for a user in an underserved region. That is when the technology developer assumes that anyway the user will only be the user and not understand anything about what goes into these technologies. Now, when we look into the division of labor, then we can actually draw the conclusion that this leads to a division of knowledge as well, which in itself means that there will be a lot of experience and problem-solving knowledge concentrated in this person that is performing one and the same task all the time. And if you take this along, this means that women have specific knowledge on which are important to water infrastructure development. They know where the water source areas are. They know where good water is. They know where at what times there will be water available, and that knowledge can be tapped into. Now let's keep in mind that when we talk about women, we talk about 50% of the population, so it's not a minor group. We are referring to, we speak about 50% of our global population that actually inherits by collecting day by day water in a quiet way, accumulates that knowledge, which if tapped into, help to improve the efficiency of water projects. This is because women are more serious about good use of funds, for instance, towards improving water supply or water conditions in their area. And it also has resulted in a re-engineering of water supplies and sanitation infrastructure. And for that reason, those infrastructures have become more valuable and been taken up by the population and have been better maintained as well. And as a result, also the school attendance, especially of girls, has substantially improved by building in those experiences, this knowledge into how infrastructures were designed as a consequence. So this overall helps to break the cycle of poverty. We will come to this. Now, let's look into examples of how gender matters in aspects of engineering solutions and water knowledge especially. And I've picked one publication, one recent article in the BBC India News. The title was "Why India's Sanitation Crisis Needs More Than Toilets." And what is stated here, I'm quoting here, that women could possibly be persuaded to help with education efforts. Studies show that they are likely to use toilets more than the men. So this is an example of how water infrastructures have been put in place. Engineers have done their best to develop good models which are economically viable, which are clean, keep water clean, keep soils clean, but it's from a social perspective and cultural aspect was not taken up by the other 50% of the population, which in this case are the men. Another example here from a publication on gender, agriculture and assets, where pumps for irrigation were promoted, subsidized, or the infrastructure has been put in place to manufacture pumps for irrigation. And what the outcome was that technology alone does not improve decision-making power. It does not improve the status of women compared to men farmers. This is because by introducing pumps for irrigation, larger fields can be brought under production, but those fields are not automatically, the land is not automatically being owned by women. Although women may be working on those fields, they probably will be employed by men, or household sizes will increase. Simply, it's not changing the position of women in this context. Also, large assets are owned by men, and the sales are also controlled by men. So whenever there is a pump, for instance, is an asset that is usually being owned by a man, and what the outcomes, the surplus is, the value addition will also be controlled by the men. What we also see from this survey is that technology is very often more labor intensive. It doesn't automatically improve working conditions or efficiency perceived by the small-scale farmers. And yet another aspect that technologies are, like in this case of the pump, were considered as culturally inappropriate, and for that reason women did not take that technology up. So they simply stored it somewhere nicely, and when some officer or some extensionist pass by, they will take it out of the store somewhere and may be even able to demonstrate how it works and all this, but they are not actually using it for cultural reasons. So those things are very important and are showing that those differences, engineering solutions are ending up on both sides of the men and women in general. Now let's look into water and women specifically. There are two ways of how this is usually being simplified, and both have their positive points, and both have their drawbacks. One of the ways of seeing the women in the context of water is that they play a central role, as you remember from the Dublin Principles, in the provision, management, and also the safeguarding of water. And women know where the water is. How would you actually know where to dig for water? How deep you have to go, and you have to your water as far as possible, as close as possible to your house, as an example here, extreme. And the other part of how women in the context of water are often seen is to put them alongside other marginal and vulnerable groups. This is putting 50% of our human population into the category of a marginal or a vulnerable group, or a special case group that has to be treated separately. So it's in a way very extreme as well, but it also has its needs. Just to reflect on this, an example that you rarely see, you can see this sometimes, which actually shows the opposite, where in this case men and children and disabled people, differentially abled people are clubbed together, and women are separated out as a group. So this is a way of calling attention to exactly this way of categorizing people just on their sexual or biological background to certain groups. Now, the water needs, if you take this together, are socially and culturally constructed rather than defined or ordained by biological, technological, and or market imperatives. So this is to just emphasize this again, that the water needs have nothing actually to do, especially with the gender or women or men discussion. Now, but there is a very strong relationship between women and poverty, which we need to keep in mind and analyze our projects against these criteria. It is estimated that of the about 1.3 billion people living in poverty globally, 70% are women. So this is a remarkably high number of people living in poverty, and especially women in poverty. And this is in addition, and this is globally true, women work about 2/3 of the world's working hours. They produce half of the world's food as farmers or in industries. They earn only 10% of the world's income and own less than 1% of the world's properties. So this is sort of indicative to this huge number, or huge percentage of women affected by poverty and caught in this situation. Now, I'm not especially a friend of these cartoons, but this actually brings it down quite well, that when we talk about gender, it's exactly not what is meant. Now, let's look into the context of women and their vulnerability to poverty. And let's just reflect upon the poverty cycle. What do we mean by this? We can bring together those different fields. We could start anywhere here, but we could start here with a household which is living under poor conditions, a poor household. So this often comes along with no access to clean water, no access to energy to produce food, for instance. There will be only little amounts of food available, and probably no money or no way of attending school. The result of that are diseases, infections, malnutrition, and so on. The following from this will be that there is no skills, skill development, no education, no formal registry. People maybe not in no system registered as existing or in need, or to be able to access some formal subsidies or some formal support. And there will be automatically no access to public or private services, to service in general. This also has its consequence on a very low productivity, a very low or no or a very irregular income. That irregularity is actually a very important factor to the poverty cycle. There's little meaning in earning once every time a larger amount of money if that is happening only in a very sporadic fashion. Then the consequence very often is that there is no self-esteem and there's no personal control over the personal life. The decisions that you can take are very much limited, are taken by the outside world. There's usually a high mortality in such conditions, very connected to a very high childbirth, sick adults, children taking responsibility of adults, or the elderly taking the place of adults, and also more dependence, more mouths that need to be fed or looked after. So, and this is a circle that is very hard to break, and which in itself very often is self-reinforcing. Now, women are more vulnerable to chronic poverty. Chronic is when this is continuing over generations, simply passing on to the next generation here. And this is simply because of the gender inequality in which occur in various social, economic, and political institutions. And the term institution means that could be a marriage, that could be a work arrangement, that could be an arrangement of sharing resources or working on a farm or sharing a piece of land. Those are institutions in this context. Now, let's see how things can be changed. And the term for that, in especially the water management sector, is mainstreaming gender. This mainstreaming has nothing to do with the stream or the river. In this case, this is simply saying streaming or streamlining certain thoughts, certain decisions along a specific line. And in this case, we speak about gender. We are not speaking about mainstreaming women's issues or mainstreaming child issues or so. We are speaking here about mainstreaming gender. And this means that priority is to integrate women in general in water agenda. That means that these agendas have to be transformed to better reflect the needs of women. And they also have to include aspects of equality and equity concerning water rights for women. But it also requires a gender-specific action, gender-specific activities, and especially affirmative action. And this, whenever women or men are in a disadvantageous position. So although statistically and globally women are more affected in some local or some region, men out of the cultural context may be in a disadvantageous position in terms of access to water or decisions on water resources management. So when we talk about mainstreaming gender, this means that both of these sides should be brought to same opportunities and same opportunities to rights and decision taking. So that means that there should be gender-specific interventions which should target women exclusively, or they should target both, or they should target men, depending on who actually is in this disadvantageous position. What shall overall be achieved is to enable the participation in development and in management efforts, and the benefits should be equally accessible, gained from the water resources management. So this is what we want to achieve is mainstreaming gender. Now, before I stop on this module, I want to suggest you to dig into some aspects of the gender and poverty issues. You should reflect about the following in your specific environment, where you live, where you work, where you learn, where you have been growing up, and specifically look into first the gender blindness, we call that. That is meaning questioning of gender relevance and failures to recognize gender discrimination. Can you see this in your environment, or what has been going on about this? The second is gender neutrality, which means that it assumes that our policies and legislations, our budgets are actually gender neutral, or that those issues are automatically being taken care for. Whereas when you look into these in detail, you actually see that things in reality are quite different. So it's not automatically happening, although our legislation suggests so. The third, what I want you to look into is the cultural stereotypes, which are cultivated in a way by our media, by our way of using language, and which are very often quite misleading. Our jokes that we may use, that, for instance, it's considered, for instance, men earn the money or women take care for the family. Things that are simply cultural stereotypes and maybe could be viewed in a quite different way. The fourth of this that I would like you to look into is the lacking self-esteem, or we could also call this powerlessness, which means the lacking involvement, the lack of interest to get involved, the lacking targeted or explicit education or training in these issues, and the final, we would call a policy evaporation on these issues, where there's a lot of good talk maybe going on, and an insufficient follow-up or insufficient action. There may be something like paper tigers, that some institutions are especially created, or some agencies being set up, which have no power in itself, and as such any good intention will be evaporated in this context. So let's take this home, and you should read literature on this and try to see and sharpen your eyes on these points here and analyze this for yourself. So at this point, I want to stop this module, and I see you next time again.